Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Governance and Audit Committee meeting. My name's Lynn Hamilton. I've recently been appointed as a lay member and chair of the Governance and Audit Committee, which is a real privilege to serve the community and the authority and to work with all of you. Just by way of apologies, I understand Councillor Chris Walsh has sent apologies, and I understand that Gareth, Councillor Gareth, you need to leave early, and that the portfolio holder for finance, Councillor David Thomas, is going to join us, but maybe a little late. So when is that all the apologies that we have?
Yes, Chair. Thanks
very much. So we'll move on, and my second screen with the papers has just closed down, so I am retrieving my papers. We'll move on to any declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? None. Thank you very much. We'll move on to review the minutes from the last meeting of this committee on the 10th of February. I'm going to turn the pages and seek any points of correction and clarification and matters arising as we turn the pages. So I'm looking at page 3. Are there any points in page 3? Please raise your hand if you have anything to note on page 3. Page 4. Page 5.
Page 4, Lynn, you're hearing me.
Yes,
there are a couple of outcomes there, but I think the report, the concern there was forwarded. We do need to have, I think, a separate meeting to look at the self-assessment action plan resulting from it, because that we discussed a little earlier, and the Audit Wales report was accepted, as it says there.
Thank you very much, John, for those points. I think it is important that the committee review its self-assessment and develops an action plan in response to that, and we have to report to Cabinet on what we're doing in that respect. So moving on to page 5, 21st Century Schools Programme. Are there any points of correction, clarification and matters arising?
Just again on matters arising, the roadmap, which we were expecting, I don't know if it was completed in March. We haven't seen it yet, but it is an important stepping stone into the capital planning for this authority. So we look forward to seeing it. And also, I was wondering quite if we could have a date for the work that's been commissioned to provide the clarity between net zero and passive house developments.
Thanks very much. Jane, is there a date for that?
I will check where we've got it. We'll get it programmed on for the committee. I know a piece of work has been done, so we have got a report and probably a presentation that an officer can give you. So we'll get that onto the work programme.
Yeah, and that can go in the action log following this meeting. Gareth, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just thanks, Chair. Just to say, there's a bullet point there which refers to the asset review was also key. This is a statement which comes up throughout the documentation. So if we're keeping a list of our forward actions, could we as a committee see that review sooner rather than later? Thanks
very much, Gareth. A very good point and an important one. Jane, could you just give a very brief update as to where we are with that?
Yeah, the review is continuing. There are some pieces of work that have been completed, and I know Gwilym Davis, our head of service that covers property, is looking to provide Cabinet with an update shortly, and I think we'll be able to then bring that update through the Audit Committee, and again we'll make sure that that's put on the programme for a future meeting for you to consider.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Anything on any points of correction, clarification, or matters arising from page 6?
Yes, at the last meeting, I really wasn't expecting to be at any further meeting. So in order to continue my concern, or ensure that there was some assurance around concerns I had about our insurance policy arrangements, I asked for the SWAP to look at it. I don't think it's necessary now for SWAP to look at it. We've had a discussion with Ian Halstead, and I think we can probably deal with this as a committee ourselves, but it's something we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah. So another one for the action list, so that we do get the necessary clarification from officers. Moving through to page 7. Any points, clarification, correction, matters arising? Page 8. Again,
can I jump in? There is, under the outcomes there for the capital work streams, it's suggested by the previous committee that the working group should proceed with its work following the election, and I think that should happen if at all possible. Yeah, I think we would all agree that that's absolutely critical. So in line with the brief conversation that we had at our meeting last week, we were agreeing to have working groups and to have the membership appropriate to the topic of the working group in line with colleagues' skills and experience. And I know Jane and Wynne are looking at that, and they're going to do a bit of a skills audit so that we've got the right people looking at the right items.
And again, Chair, we'll get that onto the work programme for the working groups.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
Chair, before you go on to the main meat of the meeting, there's significant differences between the work programme that was issued at the last meeting and the agenda in front of us. First one was, which Gareth's already mentioned, which is the strategic asset review. But there was also here a reference to CIW inspection report. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering what's happened to that.
Jane?
Yeah, I come in on that. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the CIW improvements check took place during the week of the 4th of May. We have, I think it was last week, we received a draft to check for balance and factual accuracy. That will then go back to, I think today's the deadline for returning that to CIW, and we will then get a final version of the letter hopefully quite soon, within the next week or two. That will then be published by CIW on their website, and we will then be able to share that with the Governance and Audit Committee and with Cabinet and other wider members at that stage.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks very much. That's really helpful. Moving through the minute, page 8 and page 9, any further comments? Can I just pick up on a couple of sort of handling points, and with reference to the working groups and discussion of the work programme? One of the things I would like to achieve for us as a committee is in relation to the working groups and to the work of the committee, the work of the working groups and the work of the finance panel. I would like us to be able to have work programmes for all of those fora, and the committee being the statutory part of that, that are integrated and visible, so that all members are very, very clear about the committee agendas going forward and how the finance panel and the working groups feed into our work and support our work. I think it's really important that we manage those interfaces and understand how everything hangs together, so that we as a committee can have that holistic view. So I'm going to work with Jane and Wynne to achieve that. And the other thing, just a really practical thing, I'd like to have, to support the minutes, an action log or a matters arising log with dates, named individuals, etc., so that it's really easy for us to keep track of the actions and things like that. Just a couple of practical points from me. And I see Councillor David Thomas has now joined us. Thank you very much. You're very welcome. So unless there are any final comments on the minutes, is the committee content for me to approve and sign the minutes? Yeah.
Yes.
Does that need to formally be voted on when?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, it would be useful to have a proposer and seconder.
Thank you.
Propose.
Okay. So,
Second.
thank you.
Chair, sorry, could I just quickly ask a point of order, actually? And as obviously I wasn't at that meeting, am I supposed to be voting to approve this, or am I just voting to authorise you to sign the minutes?
When?
I think for this one, it's authorised you to sign the minutes, because if people weren't technically there, they don't know whether they're accurate or not.
And that includes myself.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Gareth Hall, did you want to come in? There was a hand up.
No, I was agreeing that I thought we were voting.
All right. Okay, fine. Thanks. Right. Moving on, following our really helpful risk training session, we now have the substantive item on the strategic risk register for Q4. So I'll ask Jane to introduce that, and then we'll take questions. Councillor Gareth, did you have a question? Sorry.
Protocol question. You had a protocol question. You had a proposed and a second, but we didn't actually formally vote on it. Just for continuity, to do it. So we need to do a show of hands for the minutes, so it's signed off properly, as you've had a proposer and seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Gareth. So do we do a show of hands, Wynne?
Yes, please. That'll be fine.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gareth, for that. Moving on to risk, Jane, can you introduce the paper? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully the training that we fulfilled just before the meeting has helped define the role of the Governance and Audit Committee in terms of reviewing this information. So the risk register, this report is being presented to Cabinet on the 5th of July. And in terms of the Governance and Audit Committee, this is your opportunity to review the reports and the information that you've got, and for you to assess the information and whether it gives you sufficient assurance to feel that those risks are being appropriately managed and that the mitigating actions look appropriate for what you're seeing there. And then as a committee, if you wish, you can feed any information back then for consideration by Cabinet when they review this report on the 5th of July. So the report does relate to the strategic risk register for Q4. So it's the last period of last year. Obviously, many of you won't have been involved in last year, so much of this information is quite new to the committee today. The strategic risk register, as Bet's outlined, is where we hold the risks that are scored higher than some of the service risks, which are managed at a lower level. So as things are escalated to the corporate risk register, those are the things that you see feature here. So those are the ones that have a higher level of probability or a higher level of impact. So that's why they are recorded on that register. As at the end of Q4, there were 15 risks on the strategic risk register, and you have more detail of those obviously in the appendices that you have. And this report gives you a short summary of progress from the last quarter to give you assurance that the mitigating actions are being undertaken and are being monitored. Appendix A gives you the full list of those 15 risk registers. You then have Appendix B, which shows you a heat map, and that categorizes in a grid the actual risks and shows where those risks feature on that heat map. So you can see the pink obviously are the ones that are of higher probability and impact, and they're highlighted on that map. There are 2 risks that have been escalated or changed on the strategic risk register during Q4. The first of which is referred to there in point 3.5, and this risk is around the impact of the Russian invasion and other market pressures that is obviously leading to increase in price variations, increases in prices, material shortages, and of course the rising inflation that we're all seeing. So that risk has been escalated to the strategic risk register, and that scoring of that has a probability of likely and an impact of moderate. And you can see the consequences are detailed there. I'm not going to go through those in detail. And then you see the mitigating actions that are in place. I won't go too much detail on that one, Chair, because we do have an item later on that picks up on that. So I'll be able to give you some more information under that item. The second risk that has been placed on the strategic risk register, and this has an inherent probability of almost certain and an impact of catastrophic. Catastrophic being our scoring matrix. I can't say I like that term, and it's been one of much debate, but it does prove that there could be significant impact should this risk materialise. And that is for our social services, where there is a potential risk that we have insufficient capacity to respond to the longer term demands in both children's and adult services in a timely manner. And that's purely down to the increase in demand that we've seen over the last couple of years and continuing to see that rise in demand. So this outlines obviously the consequences of that, and you have the current mitigation there in place as well. We have had an individual COVID-19 risk register. Obviously, the pandemic's been with us for a number of years now. Some of those risks are now being embedded into service risk registers rather than being held separately on that individual risk register. And I think that's as a result of some of those controls being in place and risks that can be managed more at an operational level in terms of that. So you will see those, some feature here, but the majority of those now are sitting at a service level. Shall I pause there because I can see Councillor Gareth?
Yeah, Councillor Gareth wants to come in. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, I noticed a couple of these are linked and interlinked. So how do you break the two? So, example W0021, council unable to recruit, retain commission workforce if requires, and also HTR 0016, shortage of lorry and bus drivers. They seem to overlap one another, but yet one's going one direction, one's going the other. How do services, and how do we, within the risk register, that we're not double counting, but also ensure that we've got a true reflection? Because you've got, for me, you've got like a high level and a medium level. So, you know, within the service, that would be a high level, but on here it's showing at going down on a lower level with the bus drivers and lorry drivers. Yet, obviously, overall, regarding recruitment and retaining the staff, how do we separate those two so we're not double counting?
Okay, if I can respond to that. The senior leadership team of the council review the risk register collectively. So although services review their own registers at a service level, it's important that we have that oversight at the senior leadership team. So that's where we sort of challenge and ask the questions you're asking exactly there, Councillor Gareth. So we look at them collectively. We have, as a senior leadership team, agreed that in terms of the strategic risk register, we need a further review of that as we move into the new financial year. So a working group has been set up to look at that. And more specifically, I think, where things are scored and whether it feels appropriate when you consider them collectively. So, you know, you see the ones there that are scored at the highest, you see others that some people think probably should score a little higher. So it's reflecting on that and reviewing that scoring on a quarterly basis through SLT. So we're going to do that as a matter of course. And that's where we'll tease out some of those questions that you've got.
Thanks, Jane. Councillor Gareth, is that a sufficient answer?
Yes, thank you. Obviously, I'm new to the committee, so obviously there's going to be some, you know, over a couple of meetings, just assessing it and seeing that and getting my head around the scoring system. So thank you very much. Thanks
very much. I'm going to bring in Councillor Pete and then Gareth Hall and then Councillor William.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you may have touched on it a bit there, Jane, but I was trying to just understand in terms of who scores the risk. So when the risk has been identified, who does the initial scoring, and then where, if at all, does that score get challenged?
Yeah, I think, yeah, whoever identifies the risk and at a service level, they would score it first. So the risk owner would do that initial scoring. And just for a bit of clarity, you see two scores there. One is the original risk when the risk is identified before any mitigation is put in place. Yep. And then once you've identified the actions to help mitigate that risk, you then see the residual score appearing on the risk register as well. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily change, but that is something that is challenged. And as I said, that challenge takes place at the senior leadership team, where they do that on a quarterly basis with all heads of service present. And then any questions or queries go back to the risk holders to review that and to update the register.
Thank you.
Thanks. Gareth, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's relating to this this issue highlighted there about there being insufficient capacity to respond to the longer term demand in children's and adult services in a timely manner. I think this goes back to the question I raised in the presentation earlier with Bets, is about what are risks and what are issues. If someone knows the projection for their long-term demand, they should be planning for it. So that's an immediate issue. There may be risks in how you implement that plan, but it leads to me that this is a problem that we're not confronting. We're put on the register, but the very fact that they know there's going to be increased demand in the longer term should be part of their business planning process.
Yeah. If I can respond to that, Chair, yes, you're absolutely right. And yes, the service is looking at those plans going forward. So we've seen an immense pressure on social services and the ability to get staff to fill the posts that we have over the last couple of years. And COVID has just impacted that, as you can expect. So the service have looked at a number of ways of trying to make posts in Powys more attractive. So to make sure that we can attract that workforce. We look at all types of agency support that we can potentially bring in. The service has changed some of their operating models in terms of what they do and how they manage caseload and so on. And the head of service will be able to give you a lot more information, but we're seeing this coming through the senior leadership team in terms of what they're putting in place. Absolutely, we do that demographic modelling going into the future. Each service has an integrated business plan that covers the next 5 years. It'll be probably a little bit more sketchy in the latter years of that plan, but obviously that is continually developed as the service go through that. And obviously the output of those plans are fed through to the corporate planning and into the corporate budget development. So we're constantly reviewing that to see what we need to do in terms of the numbers of staff and so on to deliver on that potential demand coming through. Alongside that, of course, in social services, you have the preventative measures too that are in place, and some of those preventative strategies that the service are putting in place to actually stem some of the demand in the first place. So early intervention is a key part of that. So there are a number of ways in which that risk is being managed, but availability of the workforce nationally is an issue, and there's so much we can do ourselves, but it's raising that at a national level as well. And I think you've all seen, in terms of paying conditions for some of our social care workers and so on, you've seen a lot of that being raised nationally, so it's being considered through that way as well. So all of that is in place, so I hope that gives you some assurance that we are planning around that risk.
Chair, I think what this tells me is that reading the risk register in isolation can be quite alarming. But when you tie it in with what Jane has just said about what operational activity is going on to mitigate or embed that, I think there's a missing link there somewhere.
I would agree.
Yeah, because you don't see all of that information in front of you, do you? So yeah, okay, we can take that back and think about that and how better to keep you updated and informed.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Really helpful points. I'm going to go to Councillor William and then to Bets and then to John.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the officers for this set of presentations. I've got a sort of overarching question and then a specific question that sort of picks up one or two of the themes that we've heard from other colleagues. The first is really because this is the final period of the previous administration and has got its roots back there. Is there something that we as a committee, always an authority, would normally be looking to undertake at a time of very significant kind of regime change or administration change, perhaps that the kind of change perhaps that we haven't as an authority seen over quite a number of electoral cycles? I just wonder whether there is, because obviously the whole officer corps is as it was before, but the ability to perhaps to speak truth to power on their part may be slightly changed, or there's a new opportunity, there are new people with that political responsibility. Is there something over and above the regular quarterly cycle that we should be undertaking, or that there's an opportunity for us to do, particularly as the books are opened and the various strands of the different portfolio responsibilities are sort of exposed to a little bit of additional scrutiny and fresh thinking? I sort of recall the note that was left by Liam Byrne as Secretary to the Treasury for George Osborne, which has often been reported upon. There is no money for particular projects, whatever. Well, I'm not suggesting that that's the case, but maybe something of that sort of theme. And my second is a more specific question. It relates really to the section dealing with housing. I'm surprised, perhaps I'm looking in the wrong place, but I was surprised not to see not just the issue of maintaining the standards and the statutory obligations of our existing housing stock, but picking up this theme as well of being able to attract new workers. Well, obviously affordability and availability of housing is a key issue, and with the combination of the escalation of building costs, but crucially also the total blight that many areas in our county currently suffer from as a result of the phosphates situation and the knock-on effect, basically making development impossible. I'm keen to understand why there isn't a reference there to it being a risk that we're unable to not just maintain our existing stock, but extend it at a time of critical housing pressure, both in our own area and in the area of our county covered by the Brecon Beacons National Park, because we are the strategic housing authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor William. I'm going to bring in Caroline, particularly on the strategic point that you made. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to distinguish between the different types of documentation we have within the Council at the strategic level. So some of what Councillor William outlined there will appear in the new corporate plan, which the incoming cabinets are currently working on.
Yeah.
The risk register should be a factual document that is reviewed regularly, as Jane outlined earlier. And that really shouldn't change significantly just because there's a change of administration. It reflects the wider context that we are working with and identifies the risks identified and the measures we are taking. It is possible that some of the mitigation may change, some of the emphasis may change with a change of administration, but the risks themselves would remain relatively constantly, regardless of who is in power at any particular time. They will change over time, and I think there's been a significant change in the risks in the context that we're working within over the past 6 to 9 months because of things we've already discussed. You know, the impact of Brexit is now better understood. We've had a change in the economy, we've got the war in Ukraine, all of that leading, and COVID, of course, the longer-term impact of COVID. And all of that has changed the context we're working within. You are right as well, that certainly phosphates does have an impact on our ability to build houses and therefore provide suitable housing for our population and our workforce. And I can't remember whether we have identified phosphates as a specific risk in this register or not. If we haven't, it's certainly something we will need to add in the forthcoming review. But the risk register should remain relatively neutral and factual, reflecting the context that we're working within. But the impact of the incoming cabinet will be seen in the mitigation over a period of time, I think. But it's the corporate plan that we would see the priorities of the incoming administration, with that then to some extent reflected in the mitigation rather than the risks themselves. Can I come back to a point that Gareth Hall made earlier as well about the difference between risk and impact? I agree with Gareth. This is the risk register. We don't, as an authority, we don't have an issues log as such, not on a corporate level. And this is something we have touched upon as a senior team. And this is something that we need to flag up with the incoming cabinet about whether, when risks materialise, and you know very clearly refer to the pressures on children's services there, whether we should capture those in an issues log or not. They are captured, they are recorded in our quarterly performance reports, and in papers to cabinets and to council occasionally as well. So they are captured, and we do report on the actions we are taking to respond to risks. But the question then is, should we, alongside the risk register, have a high-level issues log as well? And if it's not something we've had historically. If we did develop that, then certainly pressures on social services, the impact of phosphate, cost of living, they would all be things which have materialised and which we are managing, but maybe they are issues rather than risks.
Thank you very much, Caroline, much appreciated. I'm going to bring in Bets, John B, Councillor Gareth, and then Councillor David.
Hi, yes, my point relates, just adding to something Jane said, probably about 3 or 4 questions back now, but regarding the question where the gentleman, because I've forgotten who asked it now, where the gentleman mentioned about the challenging of the risk scores. Jane mentioned that they are looked at by SLT and moderated by SLT, but just to add that they also go through, you know, the owner first of all sets that score, but it goes through that challenge and moderation in the service first of all. and then it should go through that challenge and moderation with a portfolio holder in the performance review meeting before it goes to SLT for them to also moderate and challenge, and then of course go along the process. So the other thing is in the training that I just delivered beforehand, I didn't want to overload you with too much, but I think it'd be really helpful if I do also ask Wynne to email you out with the risk management framework, because right at the end there is the matrix, which also then gives people a guide as to how they should place their score. Again, it's just a guide, but it helps with that moderation. Thank you. Oh, sorry, PS, there is a phosphates one, but it isn't high on the strategic risk register. It's in the service, being managed at a service level at the moment. However, I've made note, and that is something that we need to consider, you know, as to in the quarterly performance review that will take place now, first quarter, is that still appropriate? And should that now, has that got that high that it should be escalated onto the strategic risk register?
Thank you very much, Bets, much appreciated. John, you wanted to come in?
Yes, very briefly. Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that we have a very high propensity to have social care issues in the top right-hand corner of our heat map, even after the mitigations that have been outlined. I'm just wondering if the committee would agree with me that it'd be useful to actually have a presentation, perhaps from the director concerned, so that we could, you know, question some of these mitigations here a bit more deeply than we can through Jane.
I personally think that's a splendid idea. That would be, you know, a first deep dive with the head of service. And I'm just asking colleagues to keep me right here, but is that something therefore that we would, I'll bring Caroline in. Is that something that we would therefore flag up to Cabinet when this goes to Cabinet that we want to do? That's just that's a handling, me seeking handling advice, but I know Caroline wants to come in on this point.
Thank you. I think that's a really good suggestion, but you also need to be mindful of the work that the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee are undertaking. I think they're having some briefings from Children's Services next week, and then later on in a few weeks' time they'll be having a briefing specifically on adult social care. It might be helpful for you to observe those presentations, so that when you then ask as a service and the director to come to governance and audits, there's no need to repeat that background briefing. You're able then to focus specifically on the risks and the mitigation, so that you're complementing the work of scrutiny rather than there being any risk of duplication.
That's a really good steer, Caroline. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. John, is
anything? Oh, no, I finished. Sorry.
Yeah, fine. I'm now going to Councillor Gareth.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you, John. You started off what I was looking at, and apologies if I missed it, but is there any? There's lots of services that could have low level risk, but cumulatively they could be at high risk to the authority. Do we have a risk register per service on, so we can grade them? Apologies, that we don't get to the end of the year and we use social care as a prime example, that we're trying to find money at the end of the year to support them, but there are other services. So is there, you know, we talk about bringing adult social care in to discuss it, but if we look at, so planning, for example, with the phosphates issue, that's going to impact housing and other areas. So how do we balance the two out, that a couple of low levels in certain areas are going to have huge impact on the council, and actually it is a higher risk? So so for each service we need to understand the impact on there. So are we putting the services and doing a risk on the services as well? So I don't know if I explained that right.
Yeah, if I can can come in, Chair. It was something that Cabinet raised themselves actually when they've sort of started to review risk. It is about having that understanding across all services, and that was the exact point that they made. There may be a number of risks at a lower level in a service area where when you actually take them collectively, it means it's a much higher level of risk across the organisation and should therefore be recorded or reflected in the corporate risk register. So Bets in her role is already scan sort of what we're doing, and she may want to come in and tell you a bit more about this, but it is important that we do that so that we pick out where we're seeing those issues present themselves and manage them then more at a corporate level.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Jane. Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. I'd firstly like to apologise to the committee for being late this morning, but unfortunately I was at the hospital because I've got to undergo an eye operation next week and I was having the final consultation. So I'd also like to apologise as well. My vision's badly impaired for the next few hours, so if something does appear in the chat box, I don't think I'd be able to read it. Just to make you aware of that. I just wanted to pick up on the point that was made earlier about demand projection, particularly with regard to social services, because I've been very, very keen in the past because I do believe quite correctly that projection of demand is critical to planning for any service. But I was quite surprised actually at some of the figures I saw earlier this week with regard to children's service, because I think it's fairly well known that the demand is increasing significantly as a result of COVID. But within that increase, there's also significant fluctuations. But I did ask the question that, you know, was there an expectation that that demand would fall off now that we're slowly coming out of COVID, hopefully. But I think generally speaking, the expectation is that it'll continue to rise for some time yet. So that's just an example I just wanted to give really as to how difficult it is to project demand within social services, particularly children's services at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Councillor David. I think it is a very, very strong point, exacerbated by COVID, but relentless in its in growth as vulnerable people need support. I think bears out the committee's emphasis on considering a deep dive, but within the terms that Caroline guided us. I'll bring in Phil now.
Thank you, Chair. It was just an observation, really. Obviously, some very good discussion around this particular area of risk and that. Just an observation around really the committee, you know, remembering the focus of the remit of the committee, crossover with scrutiny committees and that as well. And in terms of, you know, potentially around something that you as chair and perhaps the committee might want to consider with officers, Chair, excuse me, is whether the type of deep dive you've mentioned, of what you can do to get confirmation, if you like, from directorates, the key risks, etc., that are facing them, how they have been addressed, so you're getting assurance overall around the governance arrangements, because obviously that's what you're focusing on. Scrutiny will have responsibility for areas as well, and it is an area of overlap. But, you know, potentially those deep dives, you could look to get, you know, on a rotation basis, a director, you know, come into the committee saying, you know, this is my department, these are the key risks, these are how we manage them. And then you as a committee have got a better focus on how the governance statement is pulled together and whether the, you know, the information you got is in line with your understanding that as well. So it's just an observation, and obviously for the committee to determine, but, you know, it's sort of, you know, go along with Caroline's point, trying to make sure that there's no overlap and duplicating work of scrutiny as well.
Thanks very much, Phil. That's really helpful, and certainly speaking from my own experience, both if you like, on this side of the table and as an exec, what I've found in the past when audit committees are doing deep dives is really, really helpful to those invited to attend with their portfolio area to understand exactly what the committee wants and to have some sort of a scope and a bit of a steer, so that people preparing to come know exactly what we're wanting to hear and the assurances that we want to enter into. And then that also gives us a model to replicate in other areas, rather than us receiving slightly different approaches from slightly different service areas. So I agree, I think it is incumbent upon us, if we want to develop the deep dive model, to be mindful of duplication and to focus that in our terms of reference and our remit, and to come up with a model so that we're giving a bit of a steer and guidance to colleagues when they are coming, so that it maximises the impact of what we're asking people to do and maximises our potential to fulfil our role. So I think that's a really good steer, Phil. Thank you. I'm going to bring Ian in, and then I think we should draw this item to a close and move on. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Just to build on the comments of the last two people, really, I think assurance comes from many areas, and the committee have a role to look at that at a more granular level, but also it has a role to look at it from an oversight, bigger picture level. So I would certainly advocate the committee and the council considering assurance mapping going forward. What are your risks? Where do you get your assurance from? And bringing those two items together to determine where you have sufficient assurance and where you need to do more work to get more assurance. So I would certainly advocate that. And certainly in terms of swap, I think we're bringing new systems and heading towards the future. We'll be able to support you in that role. So probably towards the end of this year, I would certainly like to help support the council in some kind of assurance mapping process.
That's very welcome. So we would sort of have an assurance framework going forward to complement what must surely already exist within the authority, no doubt. I'm going to bring this item to a close, slightly mindful of the time. I think thank you very much for that conversation, and for the really insightful and helpful questions that everyone's asked. I think there are some follow-up pieces of work around having a deep dive in the social services space, but being mindful about the remit of that. And I'll work with Jane and Wynne on that. And also thanks to colleagues for teasing out the ever challenging issue of the distinction between risks and issues and how organisations articulate them. I think we've had a very fruitful conversation, so thank you very much for that. But I'll move us on to agenda item 5, which is Ian's swap quarterly report. Ian, if you would like to introduce your report and remind the committee of the particular recommendations that you're making and what you want from us, please. You're on mute, Ian.
It won't be the last time, but I shall try and be more pertinent. For those of you that haven't met me already, I am the Assistant Director of Swap Internal Audit, and my responsibility is for delivering internal audit services to the Council. I've had 30 years experience in internal audit now, and I'm a chartered internal auditor. The report I'm presenting today is in the supplementary agenda pack, so if members want to find that, that's okay. And I'll just run through it. On page 4, I talk about the purpose. So the purpose of today's report is to present to you the plan of internal audit work and talk about the agile planning process, and to make sure that you can see that what we do is reactive to the current environment that's happening. We've already looked at the risk register this morning and seen how things have changed, and how internal audit work needs to react to that as one of many drivers. So in terms of your role today, it's around making sure that what we do the coverage looks appropriate, that the work areas we select are linked to the key risks, key objectives, initiatives, and other aspects like the financial security of the council. And then finally, it's going forward, looking at how we take that plan and how we give you assurance that those areas are being covered as part of some of it by internal audit work, some of it by other assurance providers. And that's why I just spoke about assurance mapping again. It's bringing that, not just us, it's bringing that bigger picture together. So on page 5, I'll talk about the approach, and the approach looks at how we build the plan. And essentially there are many sources, many drivers in the plan. Certainly the council is one. You know, we consult with senior management and we understand the issues that they face and the concerns they have, and those build into the plan. We look at the corporate plan and corporate objectives. We understand the critical systems of the council, where if there was significant failure, there would be a significant issue. So we build those in. Those are systems like payroll or debtor systems. We looked at the strategic risk, which you've all considered today. So those are considered. But we also look at the next layer down, which is that service level of risk. So we dip into the service risk, and we also look at program risk. So we see a slightly bigger picture than you see at the moment. We, as an organisation in SWAP, Powys are one of 28 partners. So we also have a wider view of risk as well. So from all our partners, we understand our partner risk and the sector risk. So we bring that into consideration as well. We look at other work from other providers. So our friends in Wales Audit, we look at their work programmes and Estin, just to see what assurance they're providing. And then at the end, I think we bring our knowledge as auditors of Powys and other local authorities to it, to make sure that, that intuitive feeling, there are areas that we may need to look at as well. So that's how we build the plan. It's a continual process. It remains agile. And I'll talk about that when we go into Appendix A later on. But that also leads into a pipeline document, which I'll just discuss a bit later on as well. And that pipeline document is a linkage between all of those areas I just discussed, so the drivers, and then the audit plan going forward. And it builds intelligence. The pipeline builds intelligence for me as a head of internal audit and you as a committee, just to show how that intelligence is building and drives into the plan. So on page 6 of my report, it outlines some of the key risks there, and some of those key risks you've just discussed. So it looks at those, and it outlines some of the wider sector risks. And as we go forward, when I produce my activity plans to you, you will see how our work gives you an opinion on those key risks, the coverage of those, and what our opinion is around some of those key risks. So you will see that. And it will also do a bit of horizon scanning as well. So our wider sector risks look forward. I think there was a question earlier about, issues and concerns. Well, I think the key thing is scanning the horizon, and the further you can scan the horizon, the more value you'll get from a risk management process. So we will help you in that process as well. Page 7 looks at coverage. I think in terms of our work, there's a high level of uncertainty in terms of risk and change. I think an agile approach helps us build something that's reactive to that throughout the year. As things change, I will inform you as a committee, and we will flex and we will change. In fact, I'd be we should flex and change because things will change throughout the year. And so in Appendix A, there is a plan of work for Q1 and Q2 for this year. So that in Appendix A is the plan of activity for the next 2 quarters, or for the end of this current quarter and for the future quarter going forward. On page 8, it talks about the assurances I need to give you as a head of audit, and those assurances around the coverage that there has been, that we do have the resources in place to deliver this plan and to give you an opinion at the end of the year. So I can give you that I can confirm that we have the those resources. And it talks about who audits the auditors, which is an interesting question because everyone asks me who audits the auditors. And internal audit is covered by some standards, the public sector internal audit standards, and we are measured against those in an independent external quality assessment, and that was last done in February 2002. And we are compliant, and we will continue to monitor that, compliance with that. But what falls out of that is a quality improvement action plan. So those are the areas that we need to improve, and I will report that to committee as we deliver those actions as well. So you'll see that we are compliant and we are fit for purpose. Page 9 of the report talks about the audit plan itself. So I'll happily answer any questions around that. But you'll see in there, you know, we mentioned risk management this morning. Well, risk management is in the plan. There should be a number of things in there that are very pertinent to the delivery of the council objectives. And then on page 13 to 36, there's a very, very long document there, which is the pipeline. Now, this is the first time I've presented this to committee, and it is in development, but it's trying to give you the deeper information that shows that linkage between what we do and how we help you as a committee cover those key risks. And I think it needs work. It's probably a bit long. I think the format's not very easy to pick up, but I think it's all part of the process of improvement. You know, you haven't had this information before. So we'll look at that, and we'll take on board any comments, and we'll bring it back to you in some kind of format that you at least can look at that and say, well, where's the internal audit coverage on that area? If it's not internal audit, how else are we getting assurance in those areas? And then page 37, which is the appendix C of my report, is an internal audit charter. And there's a slight typo in there where I mentioned Somerset rather than Powys, so apologies for that. But it's the requirement under the standards to set down the relationship between internal audit, the audit committee, and Powys County Council. So it sets down those relationships very, very clearly. It outlines how we are independent, that functional independence. So, and you know, it outlines how if there's a conflict that I come to you or the chief executive around that. So it's an important document, and one certainly the audit committee should be mindful of. But obviously, if there are any issues with it, I'll bring those to your attention in the future. So I guess what's to come in the future from me? In the July meeting, I'll be bringing the annual audit opinion to you, which is the opinion for last year, 21-22, with significant concerns and an overall opinion. In the next meeting, I'll bring a Q1 activity and performance report, which will look at significant issues we've had since then and things that I need to bring to your attention as the head of audit. And also action tracking. So I'll bring the actions and recommendations, and you'll see the contents of the report at a deeper level. So in concluding today, happily take any questions, but I'd ask the committee to endorse the internal audit plan for Q1 and 2, and I'll ask the audit committee to endorse the internal audit charter. Happily take any questions.
Thanks very much, Ian. We do have a couple of people who want to come in with questions, so I'm going to bring John in first, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Pete after that.
Thank you, Chair. It's very remiss of me. I should have noticed earlier, but the documents that I have is pages 6 and 7 are missing, and it probably explains why I was confused earlier.
Yeah.
Perhaps Wynne could circulate the full document.
Yeah.
I have
several page 9s.
Yeah. Oh.
Yes, I think there are some formatting issues within the internal audit report itself, but I was referring to the bigger the
big
committee
page numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, John.
Yeah,
so
okay.
it could probably do with a wee bit of tidying up nonetheless.
Yeah, I think so.
Councillor Pete.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, I think it was, you mentioned a phrase, I think, like who audits the auditor. And I suppose just off the back of that, I was wondering how much reliance external audit place on your work when they're scoping and undertaking their annual audit, and do they have any involvement in your planning of your audit work at all?
I'm sure Phil will happily come in to comment on that, but from my perspective, there is regular liaison between Wales Audit Office and internal audit. I think certainly they would consider our work and the work that we do. They would consider our reports. We would liaise to make sure there is no duplication of work in the planning process. So I think there's a high degree of coordination, certainly from my perspective, to make sure that we are covering the right areas, and that if there are times when we can tick the boxes of both organisations, we will do so.
Okay. I'll say maybe it may be a question for Phil, as you say, but I just wondered if they reduced their scope, if you like, because you've already covered it. But that may be one for Phil in a minute. But yeah, thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Do you want to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, in direct response to the question about reliance on internal audit, our approach in Audit Wales is that generally we don't place reliance on internal audit's work. Yep. We use it as a risk assessment basis to identify areas or where we might need to do further work to consider that in terms of our opinion on the financial statements, but also our opinion on the value for money conclusion. So the direct answer is we don't place reliance, but as Ian said, what we do is liaise with internal audit about their programme of work and our areas that we're looking at including in our programme of work to try and ensure that there is no overlap, or if there is an overlap, that there's a reason for it. We might be looking at things from a slightly different manner. So hope that explains.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Phil. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from the meeting? I've got a couple of points that I want to ask. Thanks. From me, very much welcome Ian's indicator that we'll have a tracker, because I think our ability to understand the trends and the outputs at a kind of strategic level as well as at a detailed level are really, really important. One of the things that I often find with internal audit, and I think the word was used in the report somewhere, languishing reports, and I was really just curious, perhaps from Ian or from Jane, do we have a body of reports that haven't been acted on and that we're kind of pushing on? Is that because I'm aware that other organisations have had these kind of issues, and do we have that kind of issue? And if we do, what's our kind of approach to encourage colleagues? I'm going to bring in Caroline and then Jane.
Thank you, Chair. We certainly had, going back about 3 years ago, we certainly were behind in implementing recommendations from a number of SWOP reports. What we put in place about 2 years ago to address that, we worked with SWOP to develop a tracker. And that tracker has been available to all officers who need to have access, but it was also open to Cabinet, and I think it was made available to all members of Governance and Audit Committee as well. It really had an impact, because very, very soon after we set that up, we saw that officers were catching up and closing down recommendations. Now then, SWOP have been developing new software, so I'm not sure whether that's still the tracker that we will be using from now on, or whether there'll be a new, even sort of faster, slicker tracker that we will have access to. So I'll leave Jane and Ian to comment on the detail of that, but it is something, you're right, that was the position we were in about 3 years ago. We've caught up, and I think we've got a good culture now of making sure that services are fully aware of recommendations and respond to them quickly. And that wasn't the case going back a few years.
Thanks very much for that assurance and background, Caroline. Jane, and then I'll bring in Ian.
Yeah, just Caroline's covered most of what I was going to say, to be honest, but I just wanted to add that through the quarterly performance monitoring reports as well, both at a portfolio holder, head of service level, there is that opportunity to challenge delivery against that tracker as well. So I know I regularly review mine at those quarterly sessions with our portfolio holder, and then SLT can see that on a quarterly basis as well.
Fab, Jane, thank you very much. Ian?
Yeah, just to add to that, really, I think we have a tracker in operation. It works very well, and you'll see that we'll deliver training to you before the next meeting, and you'll see the tracker that it's interactive and you can drill into it, and so hopefully that will give you the assurance you need. In terms of Caroline's comment about new systems, we are bringing on new systems. They will be in place by the end of the year, and they will give you even greater visibility to dive into audit work and see where we are from a very agile perspective. So hopefully that's a positive. In terms of, I guess the term is around agility, isn't it? And I used agility in the planning process as well. And so planning needs to be agility. And likewise, the undertaking of the audit needs to be agile, and the response needs to be agile, because at the end of the day, audit work is about identifying key risks and issues and concerns. And if it takes us 6 months to get to the table, a draft report, and the council to react to that, well, then we're failing somewhat, aren't we? Because that weakness is uncorrected in that interim period. So we are being much more agile now, and the council are very much on that journey with us. It's my responsibility of the head of audit, if I feel there are areas where the council or internal audit, because we sometimes have some issues. If there are areas where we're not as agile as they should be, then I will make you aware of those. That's part of my responsibility to do that. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks very much, Ian. I've got a supplementary question, which does the committee, so the committee agrees the plan, and we'll come to that very shortly. But does the committee then see the terms of reference of individual audits, or is that purely for the officers in the relevant service, or does the committee have any influence over the exact terms of reference of individual audits? In the past, the detailed scoping of an audit has been done at officer level. There is in Appendix A a brief description of the outline of the piece of work, but it's never gone any deeper than that. That document is there, and I guess I'd happily enter into dialogue with yourself and Jane and Caroline about what you want to see from us, really, in that process. Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you. Any further points on this? So, any further points or questions? Looking at the screen, no. So we are asked to approve the plan for the first 2 quarters and agree the charter. Am I correct? I think that the term I was using was endorse. Endorse the charter. Internal audit are independent anyway, and so yeah, you could endorse. So endorse the charter and agree the plan for the first 2 quarters. So could I have someone to nominate and someone to second that, and then we'll have a show of hands.
I'll propose.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
I'm happy to second, Graham.
Thank you very much. Show of hands, please. Thank you. So we're happy with the plan, and similarly the charter. Are we content to endorse the charter? Yeah, okay. When are we okay for that?
Yes, thanks, Chair, that's fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you to Ian for his paper and for the ongoing dialogue that I'm sure we will have. Moving on to agenda item 6, I'm going to ask Jane to introduce Jane, is it one of your colleagues? Sorry.
Yes,
the corporate fraud item.
Yeah, it's David, and
David.
he is there. I can see he's moved on my screen now, but David Morris is here to present this one. Yes.
David, over to you for this item.
Thank you. Yeah, so introducing to the committee today the corporate fraud and error report for Q1 of 2022 for information and discussion with the committee. So just to give you just like a sort of a brief explanation of the intention of this. And sorry, if I could just also introduce my colleague Yvette, Senior Fraud Officer as well. So she's on hand to answer any specific queries that the committee has as well as we go through the report or at the end. So the purpose of bringing the corporate fraud and error report to committee really is to give you advice and updates on our activity and our performance as a corporate fraud team. So we have a corporate fraud team that develop corporate fraud investigations and also do sort of lots of data analysis work across different sort of key risk areas for the council. And we then develop sort of errors from that which we correct, but we also then look at investigation work from it as well. We also come to committee to report any significant system weaknesses that we're identifying from the work that we do. Those are of significance, obviously, so that's another key aspect. And also at the appropriate sort of point in the reporting year, we would be seeking the committee's input on the future team's work as well to inform future work plans. And then finally as well, we've got an area in the reports where we're currently developing better fraud risk management across the council. So the last area of the report that we're reporting on today and throughout the course of the year as well covers that aspect of improvement work following Audit Wells's audit report and SWAP's audit report as well. So that's kind of the interaction that we're hoping to have, and we're looking forward to working with you on it. Moving on to the actual report itself, I'm not going to cover every single element in there, but as I say, there'll be opportunity at the end to just go through and answer any questions on any of the various aspects. I'd like to focus on section 3, if I may, in the report. So to explain here, we give Governance and Audit Committee, apologies, we give sort of a quick overview of the types of activity and work that we're undertaking as a team. And I mentioned we look at lots of data analysis and do lots of correction work in quite key areas such as reliefs, discounts and exemptions and awards across the council. And we're pulling out hopefully then cases that warrant fraud investigation. As a result of all the work that we do, we've currently got in section 3.3, as it says there, 60 investigations that the fraud team are now undertaking as a result of that error work and as a result of direct requests for investigations of different aspects. We've given a breakdown of those figures. What we also try and do as well is we try and give various areas that we're investigating. Now, obviously, we can't give specific information on cases because they're ongoing. We don't want to prejudice anything. So what we try and do is just give you an indication of what areas of the council we're exploring in terms of fraud investigations. And on the left there, the current status of those. So either no further action, cases closed, and as you can see at the bottom, in 9 cases there, fraud has been proven. So that's just like a brief summary for everyone. As we go through into the next quarter at the end, we will then sort of report a cumulative figures as well, just so you can see the picture building as we go through the year in terms of the team's work and activity. The section 4 then gives you just a very quick overview of the gains and outcomes. Sorry, that should say to the end of Q1, apologies, not to the end of Q2. does give you some indication of the type of outcomes that the fraud and error work is in actually developing and resulting in good outcomes there, as you can see. So overpayment gains probably needs a little bit of explanation. So this is the actual value of the work of the team in terms of where they find an error or where they find a fraud and there is a value that needs to be recovered for the council, then that is the actual value of the amount that is being recovered. So at the end of Q1, the team, through all its work and activities, has found £114,000 worth of recoverable overpayments, which is then being recovered by the council in the various means of recovery work that we can do. The incomes gains bit as well is we use this as an indicator to show the type of preventative works that we actually can do as a result of that fraud investigation. So it's a set marker that a lot of fraud teams use across the country, but it's like a value of what we are saying has been saved by the council going forward over the next 52 weeks. So whatever the team has found, we're saying we're preventing that income loss or revenue loss to the council over the next 52 weeks. So it's not cash, but what we're saying is, well, we've stopped a fraud, or we've stopped let's give an example, a single person discount from actually, we've recovered the overpayment side of it, but we've actually saved the council going forward over the next 52 weeks that amount of money as well. And it just helps to show the preventative nature of the work as well going forward. Section 5, as I said, we would also be reporting anything of significance to Governance and Audit Committee of any significant process weaknesses. We haven't found any in Q1 to report to you, so that's why that one is blank, but we would be coming back to you if there was some kind of significant concern there. Section 6 then, to finish off, is quite a comprehensive list of improvements that we are undertaking across the council around the issues of fraud risk management, following the work of, as I said, Audit Wales and SWAP as well on their audit reports. And I have to say we did have quite a poor fraud risk management rating, and a lot of work and activities now going in to improve that, to get the building blocks in place so that we can start developing and continually maturing as a council around fraud risk management particularly. I'm not going to go through all of those activities as you can see there. I just wanted to highlight two things to you, if I may, and then we'll open it up for questions. The first one I just wanted to mention is the fact that we're now developing, because the fraud risk, we've had agreements that we can actually create a training module now and make it mandatory for all officers and councillors to undertake the training. So we're now developing a module to make that available to everyone, and that's going to be introduced in Q3. And that's going to be quite important and significant in terms of raising awareness of fraud across the council. And we're really looking to develop a good module there that will be interactive. And we're really hoping that that will start to make people think fraud on every front. But the key thing is it's been made mandatory, which is excellent. And we're really pleased that's happening. And the other thing that I just wanted to highlight from this element too, is that SWAP have undertaken a fraud risk assessment. We're analysing the results of that at the moment. And that's quite a significant piece of work that they've done, and quite a significant piece of work to analyse as a result. But what we will be able to do from that fraud risk assessment, which hasn't been done for a long time in Paris Council, is then look at very specific areas that we can then do some work on, particular services, perhaps particular risks, and really start to develop some work with key risk areas for the council around fraud risk. So that's quite a significant piece of work for us, but it would be really beneficial, we think, to making sure the council is kept safe going forward. I'm not going to go through anything else, Chair. I think it would be appropriate to allow questions and comments.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in John and then Councillor Pete and then Councillor William, and I've got a couple of points to make myself as well. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chair. David, could I refer you to page 51 and the item in there which is green, which is procure and use Fraud Hub software to create better opportunities for data matching and managing fraud risks.
Yeah.
What impact do you expect from that, and in what areas?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of great data from across the council for us to use currently. So what we've done is we've expanded something called the National Fraud Initiative, which is a hub of data that the council every 2 years runs a data matching exercise on. What we've now got is a license, which means we can update all of the data sets that currently input into that more regularly. So we don't wait for 2 years because, as you know, some of the data is then out of date and it's not consistent. So we're currently putting in all those data sets again on a regular basis, and we're now currently engaged in the service areas to do that. What we can then do from that, as I say, is have a better quality data matching exercise, which we are hoping will actually spot sort of good significant frauds or issues of data error or error in the service provision more up to date and more regularly. So that hasn't yet been rolled out properly. So in that sense, I can't give you some outcomes from it. But we are starting to see the fraud team. I'm going to hand over to Yvette here, so I'm just giving her the heads up. But we are starting to see a few aspects of better data and quality data coming through, where we're starting to spot those frauds earlier. Yvette, do you want to mention the case the team have picked up around CTRS and the data there?
You're on mute.
That's it. I'll come off now. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. That's the classic error, isn't it? Somebody has to do it, so why not me? Yes, so as David's just said about the Fraud Hub, it really gives us the ability not to just match sooner and more frequently the mandated data sets that the NFI and the Cabinet Office use. It also gives us the ability to draw in some new additional data sets, obviously using legislation and the requisite laws to do that, so that we can widen what we do, and we can also narrow things down if we need to. Now, the case David was just referring to is one of the cases that we pulled up, which was council tax reduction support that a single lady was claiming from us on her own, obviously in a tenancy on her own as well. And it had matched that she had a partner who was working for a different health board to Powys, but his residence address was that of hers. So from that perspective, obviously, we can then start to unpick. She also has 3 children, which strangely enough are all of this gentleman's as well. And it gives us a really useful tool then, information-wise, to take things forward. So rather than waiting for somebody to ring up and report these people, which sometimes they never do, by proactively looking at matching these types of information, we can really hone in and be quick in how we respond to dealing with these before the fraud becomes huge. And as we know, then it takes an awful lot of time, money and effort to try and recoup any monies that have been overpaid. So yeah, we were able to respond much quicker.
We're hoping, thanks for that, we're hoping to roll this out over the next couple of quarters and see a significant impact.
Thanks, Yvette. Thank you. Councillor Pete.
Thank you, Chair. David, I think you said in your presentation you've got about 60 investigations ongoing. I just wondered, in relation to your work, do you apply any de minimis limits? And also related to that, how do you prioritise your investigations?
Yeah, we prioritize the investigations essentially by looking. What we have is we have an intelligence sort of team that do the heavy sort of data listen and the broader work, which either finds the error and then we then develop the cases then for the fraud team to have a look at. But what happens is the fraud team actually do, if you like, a scoping of each for potential fraud investigation. So they'll do some initial search and initial analysis and make a decision whether there is enough evidence to move it forward to warrant a full investigation. At that point, when they may decide there isn't any, or they might decide, yeah, they're going to take that forward. In terms of an amount, yes, we tend to not look at lower value overpayments or potential overpayment ones. We're really only looking at ones probably. It's difficult because sometimes of the fraud investigation will warrant an investigation in a certain, if it's a lower amount, but generally anything under 500 we wouldn't be looking at to warrant a fraud investigation, but we would still be looking at recouping the monies, etc., and marking it as such. So, but that would vary. There isn't a set limit as such.
No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank David and Yvette very much for their work and for the presentation this morning. I think Councillor Peter has actually asked the one question I wanted to ask, really about sort of materiality and what judgments are in place, and I think that we've had a fairly comprehensive answer there. Just two other questions, if I may. Firstly, what is our policy in terms of sort of communicating this activity? Clearly you're communicating this to our committee this morning, but in terms of sharing awareness from the point of view of good practice, but also of deterrence, because obviously there's a linkage between sort of opportunity and people's sense of acting with integrity, I suppose. Because that's one thing, and the other thing is I seem to recall several years ago a presentation where we had some cases where this kind of work within the council was actually providing us with a degree of revenue by bringing expertise and sharing it with other authorities. And I wondered whether either that is currently the case or whether it's an area which we might develop, because I would have thought that to an extent this kind of area of activity could be particularly useful for a team to go in on occasions into other organizations and look at things with fresh eyes. And obviously you've got a body of expertise built up. Is that either something that you currently do or that might be a possible development in the future, particularly allowing a possible additional revenue stream if that was the case?
Yeah, to answer the first question, yes, we do like to ensure deterrents are put in place by advertising and publicising things where the activity of the team. We also do go back to service areas to talk to them about any fraud referrals that come in, and we engage with the service area as well through that fraud activity and fraud process. But yeah, we would certainly also be communicating outwards as well to people to say this is the results of the team. I think there was a recent article in the County Times about a case that the team have been involved with because they've done some work on COVID grants. The actual work prevented COVID grants being paid out to a business that wasn't eligible for it. So it was a more of a preventative role for the fraud team, but the rest of the side of it, then the person then got prosecuted for building control offences. So yeah, we certainly are publicising it, definitely. In terms of the commercial side of it, yeah, great. And we have been developing a commercial aspect to this because they're a very good team and they do a really good job, and we do want to share that. And we have been working with some councils in England around developing a fraud and error approach in the same way that we do for POWIS. and we've those contracts have been completed now. But yeah, we are certainly looking to develop again a similar commercial offering to share with other councils, because it's not about doing something for them. It's actually about working with them and helping to develop a fraud impact and a fraud awareness and a fraud prevention sort of process and system within the council. So yeah, we certainly do offer that as part of what we do. Yeah.
That's very helpful. I think the WLGA would potentially be a useful sort of showcase if the opportunity arose for taking some of this work forward, so that particularly some of the smaller authorities that might not have the capacity to have a team of this strength and depth. I think that might be a useful avenue to explore in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of the questions, and thanks David and Yvette for the paper and for all your really, really helpful answers. I think as you said in your introduction, as Jane said previously, that this is quite a new report for the committee, and it's an evolving space, but it's incredibly helpful. I think one of the thoughts that I had was, and I think it's emerged through the conversation, so I wonder perhaps about a future opportunity to articulate, but I was left wondering when I read the paper, what was your sort of strategic approach and your operating model for fraud and counter fraud? Interesting data, assurance that you're on it, but I think I was starting to look for something more, which you've started to tease out through the discussion around informing and involving, prevent and deter, and holding to account. And I'm kind of hearing those things as we talk, but I didn't see it in the paper. So I appreciate that probably wasn't the intention of the paper, but it would be good in due course to have some assurance around that sort of holistic strategic approach. But it's a very helpful paper, and I really take a lot of confidence, David, from what you said about the mandatory training in hand as well, so, and swaps fraud assessment. So this feels to me like an area of particular interest for governance and audit committee that we can continue to develop with you as we go forward. Just on a point of detail, the table at the top of page 49 on the current status with the values, I wonder if perhaps there's an opportunity to develop that table a wee bit, because it could be a wee bit misleading potentially, given what you said. You know, it's there in the text, but you reiterated it. The values don't actually have the same. The values aren't the same. They're not equivalent. You couldn't kind of add those values up, basically. So, and what would also be helpful to know ultimately at the end of a year would be, of the recoverable overpayments, how much did we actually recover, and the value of potential income saved. Well, how much income was actually saved, because otherwise these numbers could, these aren't numbers that Jane's putting in the bank, are they? So, you know, it would be helpful if we could maybe think about how to develop that table to get a bit more information about what actually happens. Caroline, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just to explain, at the strategic level, we've paid a lot of attention to fraud within the local authority over the past 2 years in particular. We identified potential fraud in one particular service area just under 2 years ago now. And there's been an incredible amount of work that's gone into that by the service, by the team, working with the police as well. Those investigations are ongoing, so it wouldn't be appropriate to go into any detail here today. But that really did highlight to us, it was September 2020, it was brought to our attention. And since then, both the previous cabinets were regularly updated, but the senior management team and the executive management team have put a lot of attention into this, working with David and Yvette and providing support to them. We've revised our policies. We've made it clear that we have a zero tolerance approach. And the reason for that is we've identified, with the police in particular, small amounts can grow, and also cumulative small amounts can amount to significant amounts as well. So we've been absolutely clear on that, and we have issued messages. We are waiting now for the online module, the training, to become available, and we need to increase the internal communications to members and staff around that. Again, we've done a lot of awareness raising with the police for senior managers, but also we did a training session for all councillors in the previous council. I think it was about 6 months ago now. So I'd just like to assure you, at a senior level, this is something we are very alert to, and very proactive and very supportive, but at appropriate times.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you for that absolute assurance. That's incredibly helpful, and thank you again to David and Yvette for the really, really helpful report and responses to all of our questions. It's very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'll move us on, colleagues, to item 7, which is the Treasury Management Report. This report also goes to Cabinet, and I'll hand over to Jane.
Thank you, Chair, but I'm going to hand you over to James.
Oh, sorry, I did know that. Apologies, James.
Fine.
Apologies.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, members. This report will just take you through the Treasury management for the last quarter of the year. So that's January through to March, and give you a bit of an annual review as well, all in one document. As you can see, there was a Treasury Management Strategy approved on 25th of February 2021 that covered the 21-22 year. In 3.1, when we talk about investments, you can see the Bank of England's base rate has increased through the year, and there's a forecast there of how it's looking to increase for the next few months. That has allowed us to actually gain some interest on our funds in a deposit account, but other sort of lending, inter-authority lending, has remained low through the year due to most councils having surplus of funds. We are also holding the 33 million towards the Global Centre of Rail Excellence. That has generated £13,000 worth of interest, but under the terms of the agreement, that's ring-fenced to that. There was no other investments on the 31st of March, and there was a total of £38,000 income, interest income received during the year. We talk about the capital position because it's intrinsically linked. Treasury management is allowing the council to get the funds in place for its day-to-day treasury management and cash flows. So the actual outturn was 72.5 million. The original budget was 100 million, of which about 50% was actually anticipated to be borrowing. But as you can see in the charts below, following grants from Welsh Government and some funding from revenue towards the end of the year, the borrowing was significantly less as a percentage, which will save the council in 21-22 and future years going forward. As you can see, through 3.17, the capital financing requirement, which is the council's underlying borrowing requirement, initial estimates were for it to go from 422 to 468, increase of 40 million. In fact, by the end of the year, with these extra grants and extra revenue funding, it's only increased by sort of 7 million. So that's a huge reduction and a huge saving going forward. The council remains under-borrowed by just under 40 million. This is more cost effective than holding money in deposits account earning a lower rate and borrowing at a higher rate. So we use what we're holding rather than borrowing, and there's quite a saving. Although if we start to run down our reserves for the pressures that we're seeing at the minute and sort of paying back other things, that will drop. There's a summary there of the total borrowings. at the end of each year, and the debt maturity profile. We did so 37.5 million of borrowing from PWLB and other local authorities was repaid during the year, and we did source a further 30 million from the PWLB whilst the rates were extremely attractive, and a further 10 million from other local authorities. The continuing repayment of the Nantellan deposit is continuing because of the backfilling works on the site. So that's reducing the cash position, and again under borrowed. Financing costs net revenue stream, it's 3.30. You can see through the year that they've gradually it's a better position, and as you can see, as the percentage was 3.9% at the end of the year, significantly lower than what was in the original Treasury management strategy. Again, that's budget reprofiling, that's extra grants anticipated, and the extra revenue used to fund capital during the year. I think those are outlined in the 3 bullet points there. All Treasury management indicators were complied with during the quarter of 31st March 2022 and throughout the rest of the year. There are forecasts and a narrative from Link, our Treasury management advisors there, but please be aware they're a few months out of date and significant things have happened since then, and we'll provide a more updated one when you get the Q3 report in the next few months. And then we've got the VAT key performance indicators there at the end of the report as well, to see what the errors we're picking up on and corrections we're making. I think that covers off everything I have to say. So, any questions?
Thank you very much, James. Questions from the meeting, and I'm going to bring John in first, and then Councillor Pete.
Thank you, Chair. I'm unmuting. That's it. James, I over my time on the council in previous years, I have noticed that we do tend to borrow in the month of March quite considerable sums of money, which we very often don't use, but that money has been borrowed to because of the potential invoices coming in for major capital developments. What was the case? What was the situation this year? I see a significant sum of authority money due in a year's time.
So the local authority borrowing was taken out in April, and that will be repaid in August, and that will be repaid this following August. There was a shortfall of cash there required at that point in time.
Right.
The PWLB borrowing was taken out later in the year, and rates dipped for 50-year money, dipped to something like 1.36 or 1.37% in November. We had a 10 million loan maturing in February, so we took the opportunity to take it at that rate in November and hold the cash for a few months, but we didn't take any out after that date of November last year. And PWLB rates at the end of the year were 2.3, 2.4%, and then now at 3.2%. So it seemed to have been the right decision at the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't criticize it. Wouldn't criticize what you're doing. I was just concerned that you were getting the right information of the cash flow needs at the end of the year, which historically hasn't been the case.
Yes, we didn't do it last year because there wasn't a need. We're trying to get better at managing our cash flow, but it's quite a moving feast, and you know, when funds are flowing from Welsh Government towards the end of the year at a catastrophic rate, or astronomical rate is probably a better word, it's very difficult to see. So, but we're trying to manage it and flexibly as we can. Okay,
is there anything we should be looking for within the council to ease your burden on this, these sort of predictions, cash flow fluctuations?
It's very difficult. Everyone is, you know, we're trying to get better forecasts for the schemes, but you know, and we're forecasting what we can. But there is, there's significant uncertainty about Welsh Government funding towards the end of the year, things like that. So, and it just does impact, yeah.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing the result next year when the helps people come in-house. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a supplementary, if you don't mind, Councillor Pete, if I just jump in. It was about the cash flow fluctuations. James, do you benchmark cash management with other authorities or anything like that?
No, we don't. We haven't. Perhaps that's something we can look into.
Yeah, no, it was just, again, drawing on previous experience. I've been in organisations where we actually were monitored by higher authorities, as it were, on a monthly basis on our cash management, and it was benchmarked with other similar organisations. And so it was really just out of curiosity if that was practice in local government. But thank you, Councillor Pete, for allowing me to jump in. Over to you.
No problem. No, thank you, Chair. It was just a quick one, hopefully, James. Was you used the phrase "we are £40 million under borrowed," and I just wondered if you could explain that for me.
Okay, we set a capital program, and obviously we start off with these are the plans. This is how we're going to fund it. So we'll take into account. So say we got a capital program of 100 million, we've got resources of say 30 million grant, and we've got 20 million funded from revenue, for example. That leaves a borrowing requirement, sort of a funding shortfall of 50 million, if my example's flowing through in your head there. But we get sort of cash fluctuations day by day in the council, or a month by month, whilst we set a revenue budget that should be balanced overall. There will become surpluses and deficits during the year that we have to manage through Treasury management. So what happens is, and as you've probably seen in the outturn reports when they're published, I think that there is, out through the year, there is money in reserves, and that's been built up for the last couple of years. So in effect, the council should have that money sat in a bank account somewhere earning interest. So that would sit in the bank account, and I think what it is in our current account is probably like 0.6%. So that could be sat there earning 0.6%, and then we'd have to borrow at sort of, I don't know, 2-3%. But we don't do that. We literally we only borrow as a last resort when we run out of cash. So our capital financing requirement is the amount that we should have borrowed. But because we got this sort of cash sat there that we're not that we're not getting good return on, well, it's far better to spend the cash and not borrow for the revenue budget, and that's kind of how we get to that under borrowed position. Is that making sense to you? Sorry, it's a little bit of a difficult concept.
Yeah, so there's a limit up to which you could borrow, but it's not cost effective to do so. It's better to use reserves.
Absolutely,
yeah. Is there though a flip side of that coin as well, though, James, with like rising interest rates as they are at the moment, not to actually go out and borrow that 40 million at a cheaper rate now?
There is, but there would be a cost to carry when we needed that, so we'd be picking up that rate now. As long as interest rates for deposits and investments are lower than borrowing, it doesn't make sense to go out and do it. But of course, it does make sense to go tie in some rates early, which is what we did last November. Our current forecasts are suggesting that the rates are going to, whilst they've jumped in the last 6 months, they're going to tail down over the next couple of years. We will try and time it that we borrow at the most optimum time. But I don't have a crystal ball that works particularly well, as anyone does.
No, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pete, for your questions, and James. Jane wanted to come in, then I'm going to go to Councillor David and then to Gareth.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to pick up just to enable a better understanding, I think, across Governance and Audit Committee. James talked there about our policy to use cash to support capital and keep maintaining that under borrowed position, which he's just picked up on. What we also do, because of the impact of borrowing on the revenue account, and we know revenue funding is sparse. You know, we know we've had poor settlements for many years over the last decade. They did improve last year, and we are now seeing positive settlements, which is really good to see. But because of that, and because of the pressure on that revenue budget, we've always looked for other opportunities to support our capital programme rather than borrowing. And we took that opportunity as a result of the outturn last year to do that. And that's why you've seen those figures change quite considerably this year. So that's been a policy that we've maintained. And we did see a lot of grant funding coming in last year that we were able to use and direct towards our capital financing as well. I think you've picked up on one of my other points around inflation and the cost on interest rates, both for borrowing but also for holding cash, and it's been the best policy up until now because of such low levels on bank rate, not to hold that level of cash. But there will be a point where it'll be more favourable to keep that cash and have that interest on those investments. So we keep a keen eye on that, and as James said, I wish we had a crystal ball so we'd know exactly where we're going. So it's something we have to routinely monitor through our Treasury management advisors, who we meet regularly with to look at that position. So those were just a couple of things I wanted to highlight.
Much appreciated, Jane. Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. Just to stop on this under borrowed position. Jane, we did have a discussion about this Nant Helen 106 deposits earlier in the week, but since then I've had information from Nant Helen that they're expecting to finish the backfill and stage 1 of restoration in July. Now, obviously, we're looking at figures here that's to the end of the fourth quarter, so presumably the full impact on this under borrowed figure from Nant Helen, with regard to the Nant Helen impact, then it isn't going to appear until perhaps sometime in quarter two. Yeah. So what exactly do you expect that impact to project like? Because I think the total deposit figure was about 19 or 20 million pound, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So would that actually mean that the figure we're talking in this report of nearly 35 million, is it, of under borrowed, would that reduce by 20 million, or is that too simple a calculation?
It's a bit too simple because there will be other factors that feed into that. Obviously, where our capital financing requirement sits this year as opposed to last year will have an impact on that. But you're absolutely right. Releasing that level of cash out of our system will inevitably bring that borrowing under borrowed position down. But James will have to redo the calculation. So although it will have some impact, it isn't the only factor. So we'll have to wait and see what that calculates out as.
Okay, thanks, Jane.
I think we've already repaid about half of it through the last financial year.
Yeah.
So we would have had a higher under borrowed position had we not repaid that.
Right. Yeah. My understanding is that it's being phased as they complete each section. We release X amount of money. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. Yeah. I understand that.
So
yeah.
I think we were about halfway through at the end of the year.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring Caroline in at this point. I'll come back to you, Gareth, in a wee minute.
Thank you. Just for the benefits of members who are less familiar with GCRE than I know Councillor David is, I think it's important to just be clear that there are two elements of money we've been holding for the Nant Helen site. There is the bond for restoration, and I think that is what Councillor David was referring to there. So that is a bond we've been holding and it was growing for a number of years, but is presumably being paid back now as the restoration is taking place and coming to its conclusion. But I think, James, the figure referred to in paragraph 3.5, my assumption is that's a different amount. That's the amount of money that Welsh Government has put towards the new project, the GCRE project, the Global Centre for Rail Excellence, which we've been asked to hold for the project. And that itself has generated a bit of interest for the project. But am I right, James, that we're talking about there are two different elements here? There's the bond, and separately there is the money we're holding for Welsh Government.
Yes, we were holding, the bond was originally 19.5 million, and we've repaid about half of that now. And we are also holding the 33 million sort of repayable funding towards the global, the railway scheme going forward.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thanks for prompting that clarification, Caroline, much appreciated. I'm going to come to Gareth now.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was looking at the capital programme and how much of the capital programme is funded from Welsh Government grant. And going back to the risk register about increasing in the cost of capital schemes, which if you get a grant, it's down to the council to make sure any increase in cost they fund. And then I heard James say you get money offloaded nicely from the Welsh Government at the end of March, which can top this up and so preclude the need for borrowings, but that cannot be taken for granted.
No.
So with inflation, we've had very low inflation, very competitive construction costs and what have you. The whole ball game is going to change. Inflation at 11%, lack of materials. There's going to be, I think there's going to be a major risk on the council about having to borrow and borrow at increased rates to make up the balance of these capital works.
Yeah, can I come in, Chair?
Yeah, come in.
I think it depends very much on the scheme. A lot of that grant funding from Welsh Government relates to 21st century schools. So those are based on each individual scheme, and we ensure that we keep that dialogue open with Welsh Government where they are part funding a scheme. So I think most of those grants are related to schemes that are about to come to completion. But we have had an instance recently where we were about to sign a contract for one of those new schemes, and the contractor refused to sign because they weren't sure they could commit to holding the prices that they'd submitted as part of that. So that had to be re-looked at and worked through in terms of then finalising where that price would sit. And as a result of that, we had those conversations with Welsh Government. And I think for that particular scheme, it turned out that we could still manage it within the funding envelopes that we've got. So it's important to make sure, based on the situation we currently see ourselves in, that we keep that dialogue open with them. But absolutely, I don't think we're likely to see the level of funding coming through from Welsh Government this year that we did last year and in previous years. And we absolutely don't plan that will be the case. But you're right. The cost of our capital schemes is likely to escalate due to material prices and so on. And we're seeing some of that coming through now. That will increase our borrowing requirement, and then we can only borrow at a higher level as well. So all of this is something we'll clearly be factoring into our new medium-term financial strategy. And we've started having discussions with the new cabinet around this and developing that and revisiting our capital programme and how we finance it over the next 5, 10, 15 years. It's something that we're looking a lot at now to take consideration of all of those factors.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Thank you, Jane. And I'm going to go to John. John, are you on mute?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Sorry, my button wasn't working. James, I'm going to go to something I often refer to, which is the appendix on page 72. And I'm referring to the table about purchase cards. I've spoken to Jane about this before, and I know we are now cross-charging the departments concerned, but you know, at this level of error, should we be taking further action, for example, either fining the people concerned or indeed just cancelling the cards?
Those are all options we have.
Yeah, it's time we took some of them, isn't it?
Yeah, whilst there is a substantial amount on purchase cards, it might not be, in a lot of cases, that is not recoverable, and they are trying to recover it illegitimately. So you know, so that's why that check has been put back in. So we are not recovering more VAT than we should.
Yes, but I look at the table on there on page 73. You know, and we're talking about no signed authenticated receipt, 85,000, no invoice uploaded to purchase card system, 53,000. I mean, these figures are simply unacceptable. They're unnecessary and therefore unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. That no signed authenticated receipt has been solved. That's just a process we go through for making the payment and then obtaining the proper VAT invoice afterwards. Again, yeah, the purchase card system, the majority of that will be VAT that should not have been recovered in the first place, hence why it's charged back. So it's kind of skewing the figures. The team are doing a huge amount of work to educate the card holders. Just a reminder that obviously having the cards is far safer than them having cash in a lot of these schools, you know, and they're far easier, far safer for fraud and things like that, especially for little things like schools, for breakfast clubs and things like that. So there's a bit of a balance to strike, but we are working on educating them as best we can. I don't know if Jane's got anything else to add there.
You've given the answer that Jane has given me, I think, for the last 4 or 5 years. You're absolutely right, but at some point we're going to have to dig our heels in, because there is a significant cost to the council, not just in the VAT, but in the people chasing these invoices.
Yeah, I think we do withdraw cards. You know, if people are found to not be using them appropriately, or we have concerns, we do cancel cards, and obviously that's something we take very seriously. I don't think we have taken disciplinary action necessarily with a member of staff around any of this. I suppose that is an option, but obviously that would probably be the last resort. It's working with the service areas and the actual officers concerned to make sure that they comply with all of the processes that we've got in place first. So we do have those conversations, and where we've got schools involved, obviously the team for schools reinforce those messages all the time as well. So we do as much as we can proactively to try and drive this down, and it won't always be the same people, but obviously, yeah, I take your point, John.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane and John, for the question. Councillor David.
Just very quickly, Chair, just a question for Ian. We do audit schools. Is this something that we'd look at when we audit schools, Ian?
In fact, I was just going to put my hand up just to say that, actually. In terms of purchase cards, we recognise that it's an area of potential fraud, and it's an area that's very efficient and works very efficiently. But there is risk involved with that, you know. So when we go and we've in the audit plan for Q2, you'll see there's an audit of purchase cards, and that audit of purchase cards will look at the bigger data, but it will look at, in particular, the key culprits and identify the key culprits, and it will then dive deeper. I think one of the issues we have is you've got to understand why this keeps occurring over and over again, and what the root cause of that problem is. Is it awareness? Is it is it a training issue? Is it just a general lack of resource? So the piece of work we're doing in Q2 this year will hopefully get to the bottom of that. Will lift the stone and give us more of an indication of what the root cause of that is. As you say, we go and audit schools, and that is an area we specifically look at. So we've got a number of school reports where we've been there, and we have commentated on how they operate their purchase cards, and we will make recommendations. And that is one of the key areas that we look at. So we've got that, but of course we can't cover all the areas. So I think we see the smaller pictures in our audits, but we've got to look at the bigger picture and how we make a change in the bigger picture, really.
Thanks, Ian. That's good to hear. Thanks.
That's good to hear. We'll look forward to seeing that when it comes in due course. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any further comments on the Treasury management? No, I think, well, it remains to thank James and Jane for the paper, and thank you very much, and we'll move on. The next item is an oral report from Jane on the rising energy costs and the implications of supply chain issues, which we have actually already touched on as we've had other agenda items. I understand there is a paper that will come round after the meeting, but Jane, if you could give us a bit of an update, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, apologies that the report wasn't ready in time to release to Audit Committee in a timely manner. So it will be released and we can table it for a future meeting to formally receive it. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an update to give you assurance really that the impact of inflation and price rises that we're seeing is being monitored very carefully across the organisation. We have received some requests from suppliers and providers to look at contracts with them as due to the impact it's having on them. And obviously making sure that we have providers and suppliers that are viable over the longer term to be able to provide those services to the council. We have put in a process to formally review this. So we used cells, as we call them, quite actively through the pandemic, looking at specific items and issues. And we have set up a cell that is monitoring these price increases across the organisation. So that's built up of a number of officers that meet regularly to review this. Alongside that, we have set up a register where there are specific issues being seen in services. They complete a bit of a form, which we then look at in those meetings, but they are held then on a register. And as part of that, obviously, we can monitor the potential impact. We haven't had specific guidance about managing this specifically, but through Welsh Government and through the Welsh procurement policy notes that we've seen in the past, those have been very good about setting out processes and the way you would look at these issues with contractors as part of their contractual arrangements. And we've adopted the approach that we've seen in there, or the principles within policies around that. And that is very much led by an open book review with our contractors and suppliers, looking at their financial position, understanding how much of the contract actually relates to the specific price increase that we're seeing. So an example of that would be in terms of a transport provider, how much of the contract is reliant on fuel. And then we can look to see where those inflationary increases need to be applied more specifically. So that's part of the process that we're looking at. So through those processes, I think it's fair to say we feel we've got a really good handle on monitoring this. Obviously, there will come a time where that starts to have a budgetary impact. Services will look to manage that within their individual service budgets in the first instance. And we are making sure that now when you receive, or the council receives, the Q1 report on this year's budget, we will start to highlight any concerns that we're currently seeing through that as well. If, of course, it comes to a position where services aren't able to manage within their own resources on some of these issues, we already have a very clear environment process in place through the financial regulations of the council, and that is the process that will be followed in terms of any budget changes as a result of these increases that we're seeing coming through. We did raise this as a risk when we set the budget for the current year. And as a result of that, the council has a number of budgets or reserves that we've set aside to manage this specifically. So we would look to draw on those if we need to. But as I said, we are monitoring that very closely, and Q1 will start to give you a flavour of the things that are coming through. We're also, in light of this, revising our medium-term financial strategy. I mentioned that in terms of capital earlier, but obviously we're looking at our revenue budget as well. In terms of the strategy that we had previously, we were building in 2% levels of general inflation. Obviously that has changed significantly. So we will be reviewing the assumptions in our plan, and we will be doing that with Cabinet over the next few months, with hopefully bringing a revised strategy to Council for approval in September. So that will start to build on some of that. So I hope that gives you a flavour that we're doing everything we possibly can. As I said, I will make sure that you receive the report formally for the next Audit Committee, so that you can have that set out in a report format.
Thanks very much, Jane. Much appreciated. John, you have a question? Are you on mute?
That's better. Jane, we have spoken at some length earlier about the open book arrangements with various suppliers. I would just like to say that I think that we are not always dealing with very sophisticated accounting systems with some of these suppliers, and I think we need a fairly light touch when we're speaking to them. But my main question really is surrounding the schools. Come September, October, they're going to need to turn their heating on, and at the current rate of progress, the budgets that they've submitted are going to be totally insufficient. What special arrangements have you made for that particular sector?
Yeah, it's something we've talked about, and I think at the end of last year, again, schools saw a benefit of some of that additional funding coming through from Welsh Government. So we have a team that works very closely with schools, a finance team that supports schools, and they are making sure they're updating schools, one, to consider that benefit that they saw and how they'll be able to draw on some of that potentially to manage the cost going through. But we will be keeping them updated at every point or as to when we're likely to see these prices start to increase. We do buy some of our energy in advance through national procurement frameworks, so it's not going to impact us immediately. We know there will definitely be an impact from April 23, but we may see some of that starting to come through now through the autumn. So it is about making sure we're passing on the information we have at every point, and schools may well have to reflect on their budget plans, and we will be helping and supporting them to do that through the autumn as we start to look at next year's budget plans and plans into the future.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. Any further questions for Jane on the energy costs and other inflationary pressures and supply chain matters? No. No further questions at this point, Jane, but we'll have the paper at the next meeting. I'm going to bring in Bethan. Are you leading on the Audit Wales Q4 report, or is Phil? Is it Bethan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I think Phil and I are going to do it between us, actually.
Okay,
so what will happen is I'll run through the performance aspects of it, and Phil will run through the finance. Phil, do you want me to go first, or do you want to?
Should I just do a quick introductory, if that's all right?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Bethan. Thanks, Chair. All I was going to say, some members would be used to seeing this report, but for new members, probably just explain the purpose of it. So at Audit Wales, one of the requirements we've got is to produce a quarterly report for all our audited bodies, just to inform you of progress on our work and our work programs. So previous members of the committee would be used to seeing this over the last sort of 6 to 9 months. Newer members will get used to seeing our brief update at committee meetings going forward. So basically, if I just mention really that on the first page of our programme on page 75, it makes reference to the work programme consultation that the Auditor General undertook earlier this year in March, and responses were received in April, which are currently being worked through to inform sort of future work programs. Even though that consultation has closed, I know as an organisation, and certainly from the Auditor General, if people have still got views on our work programme, I'm happy for those to be received as we go through the year. Excuse me. Should you have any points on there. The only other thing that I was going to touch on before I hand over to Bethan is on page 76, which provides a brief update on our financial audit work, and in particular 2 aspects: the audit of the Council's 21-22 statement of accounts and Powers Pension Fund. Just to give a quick update, met with Jane and colleague Dan yesterday. We're anticipating receiving the council's draft accounts later next week or early the week after. We'll be looking to start work on the statutory accounts, so the council's accounts then in July. What I would say at this point, just to inform members really, some deadlines set by the Welsh Government have been extended with flexibility. So for local government, this is as a result of the ongoing implications of COVID, for local government, the extensions have been applied to the end of November in terms of having the council's accounts signed and published. Internally, we're working to a deadline of trying to ensure that all 22 local authorities' accounts are signed off by the end of October, if at all possible. And our priority, after completing our NHS audits, which was signed off mostly last week, we're now working on central government audits and then quickly moving on to local government audits in the next few weeks. So our priority is then to complete all the local government audits, powers included, before moving on to audits of the pension fund. There's different dates for them being completed. Again, the pension fund audit we'd be looking to complete by the end of November, which is again a separate statutory date, but we're concentrating on our audits of councils first and then moving on to pension funds after. In terms of how we're going to audit this year, we've been liaising with Jane and colleagues at Powys, and predominantly council staff continue to work from home, as we have mainly, but during the summer months and through final audits that we're undertaking, what we've been doing is working as an audit team in our office a couple of days a week, and that's what we propose to do on the council's accounts. Our audit teams will actually be in our office. Should we need to go to Powys at all, that's not a problem. And even I may be speaking to Jane about the possibility of a couple of members of staff, if need to be, working there a day or so a week, as one lives in Bilf and the other lives in Brecon. So, you know, we're quite amenable to that. So at the moment, I know that John asked previously, did we have staff in place? Yes, we have. So we'll be looking to start our work on the accounts in the next couple of weeks now when we get the draft.
Thanks very much, Phil. Any questions for Phil before we hand over to Bethan?
Oh, probably, Chair, just one thing I'd forgotten to mention is, in terms of both those audits, the audit plans will come to the July meeting. We were hoping to get them today, but I think the agenda just didn't allow it, so they'll come to the July meeting.
Thanks very much, Phil. Much appreciated. Bethan, all yours.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Phil. First of all, nice to meet everybody. My name is Bethan Hopkins. I'm the Performance Audit Lead here at the Council, and I'm also the Performance Audit Lead at the Health Board. So I do both organisations. Can you just bear with me one moment? I'm having some noise issues here. Hang on. Apologies, you should be able to hear me a little bit better now. Right, so thank you for Phil running through the financial side of things. So as part of the quarterly updates, we also have the performance aspects, which I'm going to run through with you. I'm going to be concentrating on the performance audit work on pages 77 to 79. So I'm going to run through each one of the sections. I will lightly touch on the remainder of the report, and then I'll take any questions if that's okay. So performance audit work, for those any new members who haven't seen the reports, which I'm going to talk about here, which have already been published, please be aware that there are links embedded within the document itself. So if you want to go back and read or access any of the reports, you can just click on those links and or find them on our website. So completed and already published are our financial sustainability report, and on which was done on a local level and then also done at a national level. Both of those are completed and can be seen. We did a follow-up on scrutiny, which took the recommendations from the original scrutiny report, which was done previously, and again that's completed and been published in October at the end of last year. If I just take you down to the section around the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, this is something that we do on an ongoing basis. It's embedded within all of our work. So you'll see that we'll make comments in it through our national and our local reports. Improvement reporting audit, that certificate's already been issued. We do that, undertake that annually. And if I can just explain on assurance and risk assessment. So this is an ongoing piece of work which we do throughout the year in all local authorities. So we read documents, have conversations, look at committee papers, undertake it as part of our local work, and all of the work that we do as an organisation feeds into what we call our ARA, or our assurance and risk assessment work. We do have some specific areas which we will focus on in all local authorities, and then we have some particularly specific ones for an individual councils, which we've listed there. You can see we've put here at Powys Council, the project is likely to focus on. Now, financial position, self-assessment, recovery planning, implications of the Local Government and Elections Act, and carbon reduction, you'll see in all local authorities. But for Powys itself, we were looking specifically at housing, highways, waste and recycling. So you'll have a small output. We're not sure what that's going to look like yet. In a couple of months on some smaller pieces of work which we've done in those 3 areas under the ARA project. If I take you a little bit further down then, springing forward. So springing forward was a piece of work, another one which was done in all 22 local authorities, and it was split into 2 separate topics. One was around assets and one was around workforce. So we finished the field work on that. So those reports are being drafted at the moment and should be with you sort of very soon, really, for factual accuracy check-in, and then sort of conversations then before they finally get published. So look out for those, because they won't be very long to be with you. The review of planning services, this is a local piece of work specific to Powys County Council. So we've finished our field work on this now. You can see the areas that we were looking at here around the sort of delivery and performance of planning. So we're just drafting the report on that one. There is a slight delay on it because we've had some annual leave, but nothing which is going to majorly affect dates. So that's sort of wrapping up now. And the other one, which is sort of live and ongoing, is the follow-up to corporate safeguarding arrangements. So a colleague of mine is undertaking that. It's a follow-up to a piece of corporate safeguarding work which was done before the pandemic. Actually, it was a couple of years ago. It was delayed due to the pandemic. We've had all of the paperwork back that we need on that, and we'll be undertaking some interviews now in the next few weeks. I'm just going to sort of briefly touch on the rest of the quarterly update. You will see a full report like this at every quarter, and the Local Government National Studies team are a separate team to the team who do the local work in the council. So what they've done is they've updated here any impact at Powys County Council as far as field work goes. So they've given you a list here of all the studies which are being undertaken and whether there will be any field work in the council. If I can just scroll down a little bit further, then there's also information there from Estin and from CIW. We try and keep all the information, as Phil said earlier, on one quarterly update report. And if I go a little bit further down again, our national reports and other outputs of sort of interest for you, again, are all listed here at the bottom, and all of the links are embedded at the side. So please feel free to dip in and read any of those. You'll see it's a mix of sort of local reports in this overall report. There's national ones, there's reports from our health team, there's all of the resources are there. And then national reports and work in progress planned. You'll see that there's some dates running down the side, anticipated publication dates for some of the other work which is going on in the national team. So you can see a little bit around our sort of national work plan there. And then we've got what we call our good practice exchange events. So there's some little blurb on the side there under the title around some of the work which has been undertaken and some of the dates for the events which we'll be sort of discussing or holding live events for those. If I can just draw your attention right at the end then to the blogs which have been published. Again, please feel free to click on and read through those, a sort of roundup of the work that's being undertaken, which isn't in a report format there. So I'm happy to take any questions. I can answer anything on the local pieces of performance work which I'm involved in, but anything which is wider for the national teams, for the studies team, I might have to take back and come back to you with any responses, Chair.
Thank you very much, Bethan. That's incredibly helpful. Any questions for Bethan? Not at this stage.
Well, if there is anything, please just feel free to contact me and I'll update where I can.
No, thank you very much, Bethan. That's great. With an eye on the clock, also I'll move us on therefore to item 10, the work programme. And by way of introduction, I'll just reiterate what we've already talked about at various stages in the meeting, that priorities for the committee in terms of developing the work programme include the strategic asset update and review, GCRE, a private session with the chief executive, the CIW report, and developing a deep dive methodology with social care being our first preferred area of work, and just reminding everyone of what one of my remarks in the minutes, I'd really like us to have a sort of integrated and coherent work programme for the finance panel, the working groups and the committee, so that everyone's got visibility of everything. But I'll welcome any other comments or contributions as to things that people would like to see in the work programme that are not there at the moment. Councillor Pete.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, probably it's probably due to my newness, but I just wondered the CIW inspection report. I just wondered which one that was specifically. Is it the one relating to the Castell Care and Support dated July 21, or is it a different report?
Caroline?
Yes, if I could explain. We had an improvement check. It's a specific process that they currently have. We had an improvement check during the week of the 9th of May. So it's specifically on that particular process. They did look at children's services and adult social care on that occasion. So we should receive their final version of their reports hopefully within the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I just wondered then, Chair, whether I don't know, and again, excuse my newness, but in terms of like suggesting pieces of work, I've sort of had a few comments from residents in the Wales and West Housing Association, the extra care facility in Canal Road in Newtown, and I suppose the things that were in my mind off the back of that, which also sort of like ties in with the Heart of Wales Property Services Limited report, is having seen the inspection report, I wondered how service levels are monitored and actions are rising and progressed, how renewal processes are managed for this care and support that's commissioned by Paris County Council. So I suppose it was almost beginning to formulate in my mind there was a risk around being unable to undertake contracted work in an efficient manner, if that makes sense.
So Jane, can you help me out in terms of how we would best take forward Councillor Pete's issues, please? Mute.
Sorry, everybody's going to do it, aren't they?
Everybody does it.
I think we probably just need to tease out a little bit more exactly what's being requested, and then I can talk to the service and see about what they can do and what we can bring back to the committee, and then Wynne and I can look at programming that on the work programme. So I think that's for anything really, that's sort of the approach that we want to take. So it might be worth us having a bit of a chat, Councillor Pete, just to go through that and sort of talk more specifically about what you're requesting, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, I'd like to do that, Jane. Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Thanks, Jane. That's tremendous. Thank you. I'm going to bring in John and then Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair. Towards the latter part of last year and into the first part of this year, we've had a joint working group with the ECRG Scrutiny Committee looking specifically at the issue of HALPS and more latterly the issues of bringing the HALPS work back into house. Now, clearly, that is going to happen within days now, but I think it will be useful for that working group to continue for a little while just to monitor the progress of the integration.
That sounds like a really sensible suggestion. Thank you. So far we've got 2 working groups, one on capital and one on HALPS. Thank you. Thanks, John. Much appreciated. Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to mention something related to what's just been raised by John and agreed by committee. So I'm very grateful for that, because I've been very conscious of the vital importance of the new arrangements around the post-HALPS model working well. My other request was that we look at the earliest convenient time to do maybe an overall brief piece of work for members of our committee about our key partnerships and where our ability to deliver core services relates to the effectiveness of partnership with other authorities. I mean, I touched on housing matters earlier in relation to phosphates. Well, clearly, we're partnering with another planning authority within our own territory. That's just one case in point, and I think it would be helpful if we could have an overview for colleagues and myself as to what those key partnerships are and whether there is a need now or in the early future to undertake either a deep dive or a discrete piece of work around the how those partnerships are functioning when they might impact or at least they might be an area of potential improvement in the way we deliver on our core purposes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. So I think there's 2 things there, if I'm right. One is, the first is actually bringing everyone up to the same level of awareness of what partnerships we have and the importance to our statutory duties and delivery of other priorities. And then there's are they performing as effectively as they might to deliver our priorities and our statutory duties, which may be, and I'm going to bring Ian in now, which may be in the audit space as well. Ian, are you on mute?
No, I hope I'm not now. Thank you, Chair. At the moment, we are in the process of carrying out a piece of work on significant partnerships of the council.
Excellent.
As part of that piece of work, we're looking at partnership risk and how you're made aware of partnership risk in the wider environment. And we're looking at partnership governance as well. So the governance arrangements around those partnerships. So hopefully feedback to you in the next couple of months on that to give you some assurance on that.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
That's exactly, Chair, what I was sort of edging towards. So that's very positive, very reassuring. Thank you. Thank
you very much, Councillor William. It sounds as though it's in hand. Caroline, you were going to come in as well.
Just to add to that as well, and I'm glad that Bethan is still with us. Audit Wales do have a specific process for auditing the new corporate joint committees, and we've had 1 or 2 meetings already. We've got further meetings coming up with Audit Wales jointly with Ceredigion. So they'll be looking at the overall arrangements there, and of course there are 3 policy areas within the CJC framework. We've got economic well-being, which includes the Growing Mid Wales programme, strategic transport and strategic planning. And we've been talking to Audit Wales about possibly, because we're still at the very early stage of those arrangements, that it would be useful for them to do some all Wales work at this stage to help inform the development of all the CJCs across Wales.
Thanks, Caroline. That's really helpful. Thank you. Any further comments on the work programme or emerging work programme? Jane?
Yeah, just to say, I think we've got a lot of work to do developing this, because I know there's a lot of standard reports that will come to you during the year. So Wynne and I will take this away, and in conjunction with you, Chair, look to really develop a much better work programme over the full year and into the future.
Yeah, it does feel like we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So very grateful for everyone's contributions and commitment to that. Just Caroline.
Sorry, in terms of dates as well, I just noticed that the committee was due to meet on the 22nd of July. We've had to put the next county council meeting on that day. So I think in the diary, the date of the next meeting has already been moved, but it's just not reflected in the forward work programme.
Yeah, that's right. We're meeting on the 25th for the seminar now. Thanks, Caroline, for pointing that out. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're almost finished, just a little bit late. Apologies for my part on that. Any other business before we move to close the meeting? No. I think just before we close, I would like to get to a place where we, at the end of every meeting, that we have the opportunity just to take stock and be satisfied that we have got out of the meeting what we hoped to get out of the meeting. Are the papers what we'd hoped for and expected, and has the level of discussion and the opportunity to speak and to ask questions been sufficient? So just really to signal that I would like to give everyone the opportunity to just reflect at the end of each meeting, and hopefully we can manage the timing of that appropriately as we go forward. And from me, as a new chair and a newly appointed chair in the organisation, I would also like to, I mean, obviously we're online, but an open door policy. If anybody would like to contact me directly via email, please do, and I would be happy to have conversations if that helps anyone with anything. When you wanted to come in?
Just briefly, Chair, to say what I'll do is the same as we do for the scrutiny committees, where we put a formal bit on the bottom of the agenda. So once you close the formal meeting, we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes. We've got a pro forma which we developed for the scrutiny chairs, which I can send out to you to have a look at. Just helps you structure the conversation with members exactly along the lines as you've already outlined.
No, that would be tremendous, really, really helpful. And then it becomes part of our custom and practice, which would be incredibly helpful. Okay, with that, I'll move to close the meeting formally and thank everyone for their contributions, and to thank all the officers and our colleagues in internal and external audit for their attendance and all the effort that everyone puts into making a successful meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.